I want to begin with a story that I've shared with you before, but probably worth repeating, and you'll see why they have me preaching and not taking care of the facilities around here. But it's a few years back, and there was a toilet in our house that needed to be replaced. And so I'm thinking, I'm not an idiot. I can do it. You just take one off and throw the other one on. That shouldn't be that hard. So we're in Home Depot, got the new toilet, and I was so far successful, pretty good, and got everything in place and lined up correctly. And the only thing left to do was to seal the bottom of the new throne in our bathroom. And so I ran out to the garage to grab some of the caulk to put in the gun. And so I grabbed it, was unopened. So I cut the top off, threw it in the gun, went to the toilet and started squeezing, and nothing came out. And so I squeezed harder and nothing came out, and was like kind of messing with it and couldn't figure it out. So I was like, okay, well, that's probably been sitting in the garage for a really long time. It's gone bad. I need to go to Home Depot, get another new tube of caulk. So I ran, did that, came back, cut the top off, threw it in the gun, started squeezing hard, and nothing came out again. And now I'm getting frustrated. I'm like, what is going on? What's the problem? So I'm kind of jamming it, wriggling it, and I feel like I messed up the gun. So back to Home Depot. This is how I spend my Saturdays. And I got a new gun. So I got a new tube and a new gun, and I put it all together, cut the top off, and here we go. And still nothing. And I can't get anything to come out of this stupid tube. And so I'm squeezing and I'm just like jamming it. Now I'm getting frustrated and I'm like slamming it on the ground and stuff like that. And I'm using all the Christian cuss words I know, like frick and dang it. And so can't figure out what to do. Then all of a sudden, boom, something comes out the back end of the tube. And so I was like, what is that? And there's a mess everywhere. It's cost me so much time. So as I'm taking the tube out, I'm looking like what's going on. There's these things called instructions on the label. And so I start reading them. It says, oh yeah, like cut off the tube, the top, but then there's a piece of foil inside that you're supposed to poke. And then that like actually makes it work. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, I've tried everything, put a ton of work and effort into this, and all I've ended up is frustrated. There's a mess. It's cost me time, money, energy, effort, maybe a little bit of sin and confession, and I couldn't get the results I wanted, all because I did not read the manufacturer's instructions. The way I felt that day is the way I think a lot of couples feel about their marriage. I'm putting in a ton of work, a lot of effort, and I'm just ending up frustrated. I'm trying all these different kinds of things, but I'm not getting the results I want. It's costly, it's taking time, and there's a bit of a mess. And at the end of it, you go, what is happening here? Why are we here? How did I arrive at this place? And a lot of it is because we have not read and adhere to the manufacturer's instructions when it comes to marriage. We have to realize that the Bible is not the only source that we have for marriage, that we have been highly impacted and highly influenced by multiple sources when it comes to marriage. The number one is your parents' marriage or not marriage or whatever it is. But you can't live in a household for 18-something years and their tendencies not get into your bones and show up in your life somehow. It's so important, it matters so much what you saw your parents do. The reason we do that is because in premarital counseling here at Rock Point, when a couple goes through, they start by taking an assessment. Part of the assessment is to assess their parents' marriage because we look at connectiveness or not connected, we look at flexible, inflexible, and we tell the couple, you may have hated your parents' marriage, you may not want to be or whatever, but you can't help it. There's gonna come a moment where your parents' marriage is gonna pop up in your marriage. It's like whack-a-mole, just jumps up. So we need to address and talk about that. It is highly impactful and influential. Also, culture and media have shaped the way. I mean, how really have we learned about marriage? How really have we learned about sexual intimacy? How have we learned about the roles and responsibilities, communication and conflict in marriage? A lot of it is just we're so bombarded, almost by osmosis, just kind of swimming in the culture, in the media, and being brainwashed that has an impact and effect on our marriages. Also, the circles we run in, the friends you keep, the way they talk about, the way they do marriage impacts your marriage. It's been said that you are the sum of your 5 closest friends. So how they talk about it and treat about it is absolutely impacting. And then for some of us, we just look deep down inside of ourselves and go, well, what do I think marriage should be? And what do I need? And what do I want? Which really, just listening to yourself is either an adherence to or rejection of those other 3 sources I just talked about. And I think at the end of that, we realize, man, there's some frustration, there's some effort, there's some work. Because here's what all those have in common. You, your parents, your friends, and the world. None of them invented marriage. And every single one of them has been tainted by sin nature. Every single one of those sources are corrupted. They are all poisoned wells. So why in the world would we look to the world or ourselves or someone else who didn't invent it, who is corrupted by sin, to define marriage and to determine how it works best? It's insanity. But that's where we are. That's what we've done. We've looked around to other places. We've let other things influence. And here we are in our nation, in our community, in our own homes, and in this own church. I was talking to a pastor the other day in Frisco, Plano area, and he asked me, he goes, what do you think is the greatest need in Flower Mound? And sometimes when we say that to other pastors, you know, there's maybe a financial need or something like that. That's probably not the case here in Flower Mound. Well, I sat there and I thought about it for a second. I said, honestly, Pastor, it's probably for thriving, lifelong, godly marriages. That may be the greatest need of our little community here, is better, stronger, more godly marriages. Now, if you're here and you've never been married, you were married, you'll never get married, whatever your marriage situation is, I don't want you to check out on this. Because here's what we know. God has said marriage is important to God, so it ought to be important to all God's people, regardless of marital status. Also, Scripture says that marriage is to be held in honor by all, regardless of marital status. And so we're gonna hold in honor here. We're gonna treat it as important. And regardless of your marital status, you will impact and influence and interact with other marriages. Whether that's your children one day, your brother, your sister, maybe a coworker. So everybody's got something, man, we can learn if we read, if we adhere to, if we view and do marriage the way God intended it to be. Now, here's the thing. Marriage is not every marriage is terrible. I don't want to paint this gloom and doom scenario. I know, I see on a daily basis, there's some incredible, rich, thriving, godly marriages out there. But this is true. Every marriage is at risk. Every marriage is a target, and every marriage has room to grow. We have to understand that Satan doesn't hate marriage. Satan just hates marriage done God's way. He is actively trying to kill your spiritual intimacy. He is actively trying to steal godly joy, and he is actively trying to destroy the purpose of marriage. What is on the table, what is offered to couples looking to get married or who are married is this. This is what's on the market. There's one original, authentic, beautiful, perfect plan and design. And then there's 1,000 other false, phony options. Because that's what Satan does. He takes the good things of God and he distorts them and corrupts them by 1 inch or 1 degree and throws them out there. And so on the market today is 1,000 false, phony, fake versions of marriage, but there is one done by the manufacturer. I mean, why would we not look to God who created it, invented it, came up with it, designed it, gave it to us? The only one who is pure from corruption and sin nature, right? We look to him for it. So here's what you have to do. To have this incredible, amazing, God-honoring, lifelong marriage, there's 3 key ingredients. 3 must-haves, 3 essentials. Now, the truth is, you don't have to do any of these. We can talk about them here today and have a good little time and go home and not put any of them into practice. The same way, you don't have to take lessons or practice to play golf. You can literally just walk out there and play one day, all right? The same way, you don't have to change the oil in your car to drive it. You can just drive it for as long as you can, never change the oil. You don't have to discipline and correct your children to raise them, right? And you don't have to eat healthy, exercise, or ever go to a doctor to live life. But that's like doing marriage without the 3 essentials. You will never reach optimum peak performance. You will never maximize satisfaction and spiritual and sexual intimacy if you do not adhere to the 3 essentials of marriage, your marriage will always be less than. It will be lacking. There's a story my father-in-law tells, which, by the way, Brian is my father-in-law, so I married their middle daughter. If you didn't know, now the cat's out of the bag. But he tells this story to illustrate this point. He said there was two sons. One grew up and became a city boy. The other grew up and became a country boy. And so here's these 2 sons, and the father dies. They inherit the family land, and so they come from the city and the country. And they get to the land. They start kind of scoping it out, and they're like, yeah, I think we ought to sell it, split it, let's go our separate ways. But it's a mess. Like, it needs cleaned up. So let's go get some chainsaws. Let's cut some stuff down. Let's clear it, and then we'll sell it for optimum peak price. And so, okay, they do that. They go get the chainsaws. Country boy takes off his way, starts, clearing trees on that acreage. City boy heads off this way. At the end of the day, long, hard day of work, they come back. And the city boy's exhausted. He goes, whew, that's a lot of work. All right, country brother, how many trees did you cut down? And the country brother says, I cut down 50. And he says, what about you, city brother? And the city brother says, 5. And the country brother says, 5? You only cut down 5 trees? What's wrong with your chainsaw? Let me take a look at it. So he goes and he revs up the chainsaw, and the city brother jumps back and goes, oh, what's that noise? Yeah. That is an example of marriage done without the 3 essentials. You can do it. It's just gonna be a lot harder, a lot more struggle, a lot more effort, and you won't get as far. If you don't adhere to these, your marriage will always be less than. There is a depth, a richness, a beauty, a spiritual bonding, a soul-satisfying intimacy that is available and is achievable to all married couples. But I think that very few actually get to taste and experience. So how do we do it? Essential number 1 for having a lifelong, thriving, God-honoring marriage is you must build on God's design alone for marriage. Psalm 127 says this, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. One commentator reflecting on these verses writes this, human knowledge, ability, and effort in building a marriage and a family apart from the Lord is vanity. Trying to build marriage on not God's blueprint is foolish and prideful. So we have to understand God designed marriage, number 1, to be covenantal, not contractual. That is his blueprint, that is his design. Here's what we have to understand. Contract is built on mutual distrust. Why do you ever sign a contract with someone? Because you don't believe they're gonna do what they say they're gonna do, and you need some kind of like legally binding to hold you to it. It's built on mutual distrust. But covenant is built on mutual commitment. Do you see the way a marriage can start heading in different directions just by what you believe it to be, contractual or covenantal? So if you were to ask me to officiate your wedding, this goes into it. Every time I do a marriage sermon, I talk about the difference between covenant and contract. For some reason, it always comes up as something people go, man, I loved that. Tell me more about that. Which is part of me like saddens my heart that we're not building on God's principle and God's design, that this is new information to them. But here's the difference. Contract says, if you do your part, I'll do mine. Covenant says, I'll do my part, even if you don't do yours. Contract says, I take you for myself. But covenant says, how may I give myself to you? Contract said, you had better do it. But a covenant marriage says, how may I serve you? A contract marriage says, what do I get? But a covenant marriage always says, what can I give? Contract says, I'll meet you halfway. Covenant says, I'll go 100%. Contract says, I have to. Covenant says, I want to. One couple wrote these words reflecting on how a covenantal mindset has impacted their marriage. They write, we gave when we wanted to receive. We shared when we wanted to keep. We listened when we wanted to talk. We forgave when we wanted to remember. And we stayed when we wanted to leave. You wanna know what covenantal love really looks like, look at God's love toward you. God didn't say, I'll meet you halfway, get your crap together and I'll do my part. He said, while you're dead in your sin, when you're an enemy from God, completely corrupted, I'm coming the whole way. I'm coming to you. You do nothing to earn or deserve this. That's the mindset that we put into marriage, not this contract halfway if you don't do your part and this mutual distrust. You want to have a covenantal marriage? Love your spouse the way that Jesus loves you. That's how it works. That is God's design for marriage. The second thing, God designed marriage to show something, to reflect something to the world. In Ephesians 5, it is so clearly explained. Husbands, love your wife, just like Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. In the same way, husbands, you should love your wives as you love your own body. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourished it and cherished it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. And therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother, hold fast to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This mystery is profound. Here it is. And I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. God designed marriage to show the world the relationship between Jesus and the church. So what is your marriage showing the world? What are people seeing in your marriage? Is it the sacrificial covenantal love of Jesus Christ? When they look at you, are they being drawn to that? I still believe, my friends, that a godly marriage built on God's design, may be the greatest tool of evangelism we have today. Because what's offered in the world is this ridiculous, phony, false marriage, all about me. But man, when the church says, no, I built my marriage on God's design. Look at this sacrificial love. When it really reflects that, man, that's powerful. Because people who don't give a rip about Jesus or the church still want to have a good marriage. And when we get to live those out in the world, my goodness, is that not light in darkness? Tara Parker Pope, who writes for the New York Times, not arguing for God's design of marriage, but just saying, here's the research and the data and what I've seen is today's modern day marriage. Here's what she writes in the New York Times. Isn't marriage supposed to be about putting the relationship first? Well, not anymore. For centuries, marriage was viewed as an economic and social institution, and the emotional and intellectual needs of the spouse were secondary to the survival of the marriage itself. But in modern relationships, people are looking for a partnership, and they want partners who make their lives more interesting, who help them attain valuable goals. Marriage used to be a public institution for the common good, and now it is a private arrangement for the satisfaction of the individual. Marriage used to be about us, now it's about me. And what I believe the church can offer and show the world is the sacrificial love of Jesus. The way Jesus loves the church, the way he commits covenants to us. That will be jaw-dropping, head-scratching, awe-inspiring to a broken, fallen world trying to build on something else than God's design for marriage. So how evangelistic is your marriage today? Thirdly, God designed marriage to do something. Yes, provide companionship. Yes, have children. But what I want to hone in on is that God designed marriage to leave a godly legacy, to pass faith into the next generation, and to pass these wonderful, incredible marriages along to our kids. So Deuteronomy 6:17 or 6 through 7, it's the Shema, right? These commandments I give to you today, be on your hearts, teach them to your kids. I love the way the NIV translates it. Impress them. An impression, something to the close proximity, weighty and forceful, leaves an impression. Your marriage is leaving a mark on your children. And if you don't have children, your marriage is still leaving a mark on the next generation. They are watching. They are learning from our marriages how to do and view marriage. So what impression are we leaving on them? You wanna find out? Ask your kids. You want some radical candor, some brutal honesty? You wanna reveal some blind spots? Ask your kids if you have them. Go, hey, what has our marriage taught you about marriage? Just so I'm not a hypocrite and I practice what I preach, I did this, all right? My daughter Bryce, 6 years old, she's here. We went on a walk Friday and I asked her, all right, Bryce, here we go. What has mommy and daddy's marriage taught you about marriage? First thing she says, it sure is nice to have someone to help with the kids. Amen. Very much so. Secondly, she goes, when you argue, you say you're sorry. Like, that's good. What's the last one? She goes, if you don't have date nights, your marriage will fall apart. I'm good with that, okay? That's unfiltered, that's straight from, 6-year-old, my daughter's mouth, Bryce. And so, man, feel free to ask your kids, right? But we want to have marriages worth duplicating, do we not? We want to have marriages worth handing down and passing on to the next generation. I know you guys, if you have children, there are things you're like, they will not leave the house without this. Like education, manners, respect, how to balance a checkbook, whatever it is. Why not marriage skills are a part of that? I mean, why do we often say, I hope they don't fight like mommy and daddy do, rather than going, no, we know how to have godly, healthy conflict, and we're passing that out. We're duplicating that. We're impressing that onto them. Man, shouldn't that be our goal? If we see this happen, we will hope that we'll have a change in the next generation. Over the next 20 years, if our marriages are built on a godly foundation, we should see some things happen. So in 20 years, think about that. Those kids in that building and those kids in that building. In 20 years, they're probably all married. If we build our marriages on God's design, hopefully we will see in that generation less cohabitation. Because right now, statistics tell us that all those kids over there, 80% plan to cohabitate before marrying, right? Nobody wants to commit to anything anymore. We want to slide into marriage versus decide to be in marriage. And what happens is it starts with a toothbrush and then a drawer, and then we get an apartment because it's cheaper, and then we get a puppy, okay? And whose puppy is it? We don't know. But what's happened is we've now entangled our lives together, but not committed to one another. And then you feel stuck. And then what do we do with this, right? So what you're wanting in cohabitation is you're wanting all the privileges without responsibility, which is the definition of immaturity. Throw the Bible aside. Science, data, research tells us those who cohabitate will have a less successful marriage than those who don't. That's what we hope to pass along to our children. Not this contractual convenience, but this covenant commitment mindset. We hope to see in the next generation, in those two buildings, less divorce rates, higher levels of marital satisfaction. I hope that in the next 20 years, that what I said about being evangelistic is true. That so many of their friends and coworkers come to Christ because they've got something different that we showed them. Church, that's on us to leave a godly legacy. Number 3, God designed marriage to help us become something. Good old Romans 8:28. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. For those who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of God. God designed marriage to help us become more like Christ. In that verse, when it talks about good, that's not the American dream good. It's Christ likeness. It's conformity to the image of Christ is what he says. That's good. That's how God defines good. How do we define it? When he says all things, you know what all things includes? Difficult spouses and struggling marriages. He can, he will use all things to help conform us, shape us, mold us into the image of his son. Martin Luther said, I've been in marriage and I've been in a monastery, and marriage will make you more like Christ. If happiness were the goal of marriage, it's a recipe for disaster. You take a male and a female who are just completely different. They're both broken and flawed by sin nature, and you stick them in a relationship and say, make sure you're happy all the time. It's a recipe for disaster. That's why happiness is not the goal of marriage. It is a byproduct of a marriage built on God's design. But if we strive for happiness, we'll fall short. But when we build on God's design, man, happiness becomes a byproduct of a godly marriage. Tim Keller writes this: some will ask, what if I become more like Christ? What if I put the happiness of my spouse ahead of my own? What do I get out of it? The answer is happiness. That's what you get. But it's a happiness through serving instead of using someone. It's a happiness that's not bad for you. It's a joy that comes from giving and loving another person in a costly way. See, today's culture of the me marriage finds this very proposal of putting the interest of your spouse ahead of your own oppressive. But that's because it doesn't look deeply enough into the crucial part of the Christian teaching about the nature of our reality. We were made to serve God and to serve others. That means that paradoxically, if we try to put our own happiness ahead of obedience to God, we violate our own nature and ultimately become miserable. Jesus restates this principle when he says, whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life will find it. He's saying that if you seek happiness more than you seek God, you have neither. But if you seek to serve God more than happiness, you can have both. The Apostle Paul applies this principle to marriage then, to seek to serve one another rather than to be happy, and you will find a new and deeper happiness. God's design is covenant, to show something, to do something, and to become something. There is a second and third essential to a lifelong, God-honoring, thriving marriage. The second essential is this: it is to grow in relationship with Christ. And you go, how does my relationship with Christ affect marriage? Here's how. Because your spouse is never the enemy. Satan is. Your spouse is never the problem. Sin is. And the only person who can deal with the sin in your heart and in your spouse's is Jesus Christ alone. So that's why we have to grow in relationship to him, because he's the only one with the solution to the problem we're actually facing. You and your spouse are on the same team. It's a battle against Satan. It's a battle against sin. So we need Jesus to be a part of it. We have a principle in marriage ministry. It's called look up, not over. So yes, look up at God's design, the manufacturer's instructions, not over at the world and what your friends and your parents are doing. Look up and you grow in relationship with Christ and let God change them. We say in marriage ministry, draw a circle around yourself and fix everyone in that circle, okay? Because it's true, you cannot control or change your spouse. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't address things and bring up things and have some healthy conflict, absolutely. But you can't change their heart. Only God can do that. And so you fix and control what only you can control. You grow in relationship with Christ, and hopefully as they're growing in relationship with Christ, you're growing together in a spiritual intimacy. So the number of conversations I have had when it comes to marriage advice, it usually ends up like this: blame, 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 they, if they, you're right. And they're not looking up. It's so easy just to look over and blame and control. So we have to grow in relationship with Christ. Here's a great passage to know whether you are becoming like Christ, growing in relationship to Christ. Colossians 3. It says, put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you. Put to death sexual immorality, impurity and passion and evil desire and covetousness, which is idolatry. But you must now put them all away. Put away anger and wrath and malice and slander and obscene talk from your mouth. Don't lie to one another, seeing that you have been put off the old self with its practices. Put on then, as God's chosen, holy beloved, put on compassionate hearts and put on kindness and humility. Put on meekness and put on patience, bearing with one another. And if one has a complaint, forgive one another. Just as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. And above all, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. I love the phraseology, put on, because it means you have a decision. Like no one showed up to church today in their swimsuit, because I didn't know, it just, you know. You chose what to clothe yourself with. And he's saying the same is true here. Whatever situation you're facing in marriage or not marriage, you have a choice on how you clothe yourself. I'll never forget a woman I was talking to, and she's talking about her husband. He's got this swanky job and big promotion. He's working like 80 hours a week now. And he's neglecting the family. He's neglecting her. It's just like it's causing the marriage to unravel. And she tells me, she's like, when he comes home, I just give him the business. How could you do this to me? How could you do this to our family? Why don't you do? And so in that moment, I just told her, I said, yes, you have been wronged. Seriously, he is not being the spiritual leader that he has been called to be. But in this wrongness, you're choosing to clothe yourself with anger and malice and slander and hate and obscene talk. And you don't have to. You can be wrong and still clothe yourself with kindness and humility and love. And I told her, even though you're wrong, you keep spitting poison, you're pushing him further away. It's gonna take a little honey to bring the bee back to the nest. You get to choose what you clothe yourself with, is what Paul's saying here. So what can we do today to be intentional? Today truly could be a watershed moment for your marriage. It could be a defining moment, a complete turning point in your marriage. So I just wanna give you some super practical, please do these things to build on God's design, to grow in relationship with Christ. And what I wanna bring up is, it's stuff that I think most of us are already doing, typically in our jobs, and I want to apply them to marriage. So, in your job, typically you do a performance review. Some of you will seek advancement. You'll read a book, you'll set a reminder, you'll attend a conference, you'll continue your education, you'll hire a consultant, and you'll mentor others. Let's talk about these in relation to marriage. So a performance review. Many of us, hopefully you're getting reviewed if you work, have a career outside the home, right? And so you have a performance review. Somebody rates you. We even here at the church, we got scales of 1 to 10. We're rating people on their performance. Here's what I want you to do. And husbands, lead out in this. Ask your wife today, sometime today, honey, rate our marriage on a scale of 1 to 10. Tell me why and tell me how to improve it. And your wife just heard me tell you to do it today, all right? Wives, if he doesn't, you tell him tomorrow. Give him till midnight, but then you tell him tomorrow. And wives, you ask the question too. Husband, rate our marriage on a scale of 1 to 10. Tell me why and tell me how to make it better. If you can't ask that question, one simple question, there's a problem deep within you and in your marriage that you're not being honest about. So husbands, lead out. Ask the question of your wife today. Have a performance review. You do it at work, let's do it at home. Secondly, seek advancement. Sometimes you'll go to your boss and you go, hey, how do I get to the next level? How do I break through? What additional responsibilities do I need to take on? What deficiencies do I have that I need to correct so I can get to that next level? Let's do that in our marriage, right? Let's talk about reading a book. I know guys that read a book a month for their job. When's the last time you picked up a book on marriage? Well, I mean, which one's a greater priority? God has said marriage is your number one earthly relationship responsibility and priority. Before your kids and way before your career. Outside of your relationship with Jesus, your relationship with your spouse is number one. Yet we'll read a book a month for a job, but maybe never pick up a book on marriage. Set a reminder. We have auto feeds and podcasts we subscribe to. You can do this. We just talked about at the beginning of the service. We'll text you prayer prompts. We'll make it simple, stupid for you, right? Text Unity, 97891. We'll do this with our jobs and careers. Will we not do it with our marriage? Just, have something, 8 a.m. right there. I'm ready to pray. I'm ready to focus my mind, build on God's design, grow in relationship with Christ. Attend a conference. I'm going to 2 this year. I love going to conferences. I love growing and getting better and networking and connecting. When's the last time you went to a conference for your marriage? Weekend to Remember is probably the best gift you could ever give yourself, your spouse, and your marriage. A weekend conference. It is marvelous what that weekend can do. continue your education. We love going to get secondary degrees here in Flower Mound, don't we? MBAs, master's degrees, doctorates. We love getting those extra certifications and trainings. What about going to re-engage? What about continuing your education when it comes to marriage? If I had a little pastoral wand, I could force you to do things, I would make every couple forcefully attend re-engage. Because you know what? You're not gonna come out with the worst marriage. It's like 12, 16 weeks. Yeah, let's go get master's degrees, but let's not attend re-engage? It's insanity, right? You can go and be a part of that. Hire a consultant. I love hiring, when the church hires a consultant, I get excited, right? Ooh, we got fresh perspective, an outsider coming in, gonna get us some breakthrough clarity. That's a counselor in your marriage. It shouldn't be shameful. No business is ashamed that, oh, we're hiring a consultant. No, there's like excitement, like the consultant's here, like what's next? Go get someone outside a fresh perspective to speak in to what's going on in your life. And then mentor others. If you're in an organization, you do this, right? You take the younger people who just haven't got it all together yet, and you mentor them, you pour into them. It protects the culture of the organization, keeps your basic skills sharp as you do that. So hey, volunteer in marriage ministry. Let's impact the next generation. Let's impact our community. Let's sign up and go, yeah, give me somebody to mentor. So if I were to say this, Jamie and I have a great marriage. And I'm hesitant to share that because I don't want to be like real braggadocious. Like I tell Destin stupid jokes, okay? Like I can't, do the cock, okay? But I say that because you know what? Jamie and I have done every single thing I just listed. We have. Because nothing great happens by accident. You're not gonna drift into a great marriage. There's a ton of little things, and it feels like monotony at times, like one more class or one more books or one more text or one more conference. But it's stair steps, and it's cumulative. And over 16 years, man, I can turn around and look back, and now I'm asking, how do we get here? Not in a bad way, but like a crazy, good, positive, healthy way. And I'm afraid, like, what if we hadn't? What if we hadn't done it? Where would we be? So yeah, we've done performance reviews. I've asked Jamie, rate our marriage on a scale 1 to 10. A couple years ago, she's like, it's a 7. Well, why is that? Because there's this one area of our relationship that's like a 1 or a 2, guys. You know what we did? Hired a consultant, went outside, sought a counselor. We've been to Weekend to Remember. We went to re-engage. We brought our whole small group to re-engage. I was the first one to sign up for the text prompts, okay? And again, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back. I'm just saying it takes sacrifice, effort, work, time to put in. You don't drift into a great career. And you don't drift into a great marriage. We have to put in the work. I saw this on display just so beautifully the other day. There's a guy in our church, his name's Javier, and his wife just passed away. In less than 24 hours, we'll have her service right here, Adriana. So about a week ago, I'm sitting at the hospital with Javier, his wife's in the room, and her body's just shutting down, and he and I just wound up being in the lobby for probably a couple hours. He just recounted story after story after story of God's faithfulness and a great marriage. There's one story he told that, oh my goodness, was just so impactful on me. He said that early in his career, he had a business, and he goes, my business was flourishing. He said, Destin, there was money everywhere. He goes, money, 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 money. He said, it was awesome. He said, but my wife had some medical issues, which ultimately led to her death about a week ago. He said, so I realized early in my career, I couldn't keep the job and attend to her medical needs. So he gave up the job. He let go of the business, and he found a lesser than career that could still provide, but that he could provide the care he needed. And 35 years later, he's holding her hand on her deathbed. And he's recounting God's faithfulness, and they've had a great marriage. And I look at that and I go, man, you want to talk about showing something to the world, to the nurses and the doctors? That's big time. You want to talk about developing a covenant commitment and doing something and becoming something? He nailed it. It was so inspiring to me. So in your marriage, there is 3 potential outcomes. I brought a slide to show. You start in your marriage, there's the chemistry, we call it Twitter-pated, you're juiced, whatever it is, honeymoon phase. And it's gonna run out. About year 2, year 5, it's gone. When chemistry's gone, it's character and commitment and choice that have to kick in. And your marriage will end up in one of these 3 buckets. It will be oneness, unity, lifelong, thriving, God-honoring marriage. Or if you don't put in the work, if you're not intentional, you don't make the choice, it'll drift. And you know the second law of thermodynamics, entropy, everything just goes to chaos left unchecked. And so will your marriage. And so you can end up in one or 2 camps there. You can be roommates. We're just staying together for the kids. It just makes financial sense. I mean, who else would I marry at this age? Or you can get divorced. That's not the legacy we want to pass along. The legacy we want to pass along is the top one. It's oneness. It's intentionally choosing to covenant, to show something, to do something, to become something, to grow in relationship with Christ. That's worth passing along to the next generation. So to have the lifelong, thriving, God-honoring marriage, 3 essentials. Number 1, build on God's design alone. Number 2, grow in relationship with Christ. The third, so important, so key, you have to have all 3, is what David Bellock, our new marriage pastor, will be here to talk about next week. Please come back and hear the 3rd leg of that stool. It's so important for you, for your marriage, and for the marriages you may interact with. Let's pray. God, thank you so much. You could have just told us to find someone we like, move in together, and start having babies, but you didn't. You designed, manufactured, created, came up with, invented, and gifted marriage to humanity. One man, one woman, in a lifelong covenant commitment. It's designed to show the world something, to do something, to become something. So God, help us to, lift our heads out of the way we've been impacted and tainted by corrupt sources, to get back to what is pure. God, we know for every married person here, no one, including themselves, wants a better marriage than you do for them. So God, help us not be deceived by the evil one, to think you're holding back on us, that your plan is restrictive or oppressive in any way. Your plan is the way we get to oneness and unity and flourishing in our marriage and in our world. So God, help us to pursue that. God, help us to grow in relationship with you, regardless of our marital status, to long for you, to yearn for you, to have this deep walk and close intimacy with you. God, and may that relationship impact every earthly relationship we have. God, let the people, the marriages of Rock Point Church, hold it high in esteem, have something worth duplicating and passing on to the next generation. Jesus, we need you. We need you in our marriages. In your name we pray, amen.